What we're going to be focusing on today is the relationship between imbalances in your energy body and your inability to manifest the life that you want. Many times, imbalances in the energy body can lead to not only physical ailments, but also mental ailments and inability to realize your full potential as a human being. This is I would say, not so well understood part of naturopathic health and medicine. We brought him on the show today to help explain the benefits of working with your energy body, how it actually works, how it can work in conjunction with other modalities, and how you can start doing this yourself and maybe even with a practitioner one day. Welcome to the show, Dr. Allen Bizzacar. Just for context, we met in a really beautiful container in a internal family systems, or IFS as it is sometimes known, container for men with a really powerful practitioner. So I've had the honor of being in community with Alan, for I believe a couple months. And so today's going to be really interesting because I know him primarily through the lens of IFS, attachment theory, and more of these relational modalities. So Alan, would love to just get a quick intro so the audience can get to know you.
Thanks, David. Love the intro and what you already started with. I think that's an epic frame for the work that I'm doing. And I just think you worded that really nicely. You had mentioned kind of when we jumped on the podcast around energetic imbalances and illnesses and health conditions. And that's one of the things that actually got me into the work that I'm doing. I had some interesting health conditions going on when I was younger through my whole adolescence years and like the whole slew. I can go through some of those a little bit later in the podcast, but it got me into health. It got me interested in a natural approach, which kind of led me into going to nutrition school, led me going into chiropractic school, and then in some ways kind of hit a breaking point where I started studying spiritual teachings in more of like a esoteric way of being with parts of my experience that really in powerful ways resolved a lot of the things that I was experiencing and opened up so much more for me. So right now I'm a practitioner creating my own modality,
Okay.
using a lot of the things that I've learned from mentors and teachers. And so I see clients virtually over Zoom, and then I kind of have
Is that energetic repatterning? Is that the modality? Okay.
yeah, and then because I'm a little bit in a season of being nomadic, I have in-person practice that's kind of like a little bit smaller, pop-up style, between Boulder, Colorado, and Nosara, Costa Rica.
That's awesome, man. And would love to just kind of understand. We talked a little bit about energy work. We clarified that what you practice is a mix of modalities called energetic repatterning. You have a wide array of training that I'm aware of. You mentioned, I believe, you have studied nutrition. So you did that. Also have chiropractic school. And I was curious what led you to create your own modality. In other words, what was missing to serve yourself and clients that prompted you to make an amalgam of things that you can now call your own?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have the experience of, as a practitioner, they call it practice, right? Still in the process of creating it with all the trainings that I have, I've realized that part of my skill set in serving clients is there's just like this emergence of all the things that I've studied that just like comes through. And that's created within me some desire to create a system around it, to kind of like simplify it, to help the client understand their own process and journey in the world of energy works. It can be mysterious, which has people excited and curious. Also, people's minds want to know and understand how, what, and like, how is it happening and what's happening. And so I think those are some of the driving forces.
Totally. No, thanks for sharing that. Nobody really becomes a healer or engages in the healing arts because everything in their life went according to plan. I have yet to meet that person. You mentioned chronic illness and studying mysticism, healing arts. And were there any particular turning points that made you really resonate with energy healing in particular? Because you've studied a lot of things, and I'm sure you've done breath work, meditation, psychedelics, fasting, different nutritional protocols. So, what pushed you in the direction of saying, like, oh, wow, this is my calling, this is my gift to share with the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. After I graduated nutrition school, I was working at a chiropractic office doing functional rehab with clients. I was coaching CrossFit. I was doing nutrition counseling. So I was like, in some ways, more in the physical domain. And I started seeing a functional medicine practitioner, and his name was Sachin Patel. Great, great doc. He was actually a chiropractor, and I was having a challenging time, and he recommended specific readings like Bruce Lipton's,
The
I can't
biology of
remember,
belief? Is that?
Biology of Belief, The Wisdom of Ourselves. Those were like the first two that I read, and then
Yeah.
um, and I just started kind of like going down this rabbit hole of like I read all of Wayne Dyer's books. I read a lot of Deepak Chopra's books, and through those challenges, I started to get curious about going to chiropractic school because I was inspired by Sachin Patel, my functional medicine practitioner,
Mhm.
even though it was a bit more in the realm of, it's like, oh, do I study naturopathy or go down that realm? I got some of the advice and feedback of like chiropractic is like it's got such a large scope of practice. It's a good route to go. And I think I was so burnt out of my current situation living in Ohio. I had to take the leap. And so it was kind of like an out of nowhere, impulsive decision to move to Atlanta, Georgia and go to chiropractic schools in the country. And there's really only like two, three that are deeply based in uh, philosophical beliefs around innate intelligence and healing. So I found myself in this spiritual bubble around the innate healing powers of the body. And so that started to cultivate inspiration in me. And I was inspired by more of a traditional chiropractic sense, not having any religious influence in my upbringing. It was in many ways a clean slate in my religious spiritual influence growing up, besides the fact that I had some negative connotations because I felt misunderstood from the people around me. I had an interesting look into that world.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Ohio,
Ohio.
an
So
hour south of Cleveland, a place called Medina. And then,
I just wondering, you said kind of people around you tended to have a religious upbringing. So I was curious. Nice.
and not a crazy religious upbringing, but just kind of the basics of like, you get baptized, you go to church every once in a while. And if you're not on that path to some degree, then bad things are going to happen to you. It's basically
Okay.
the general thing that I grew up in.
Yeah. I
Uh,
like that unspoken ideology.
and so like going to chiropractic school, I actually had some things to work through in my quote unquote dogma around religion and spirituality. The people that resonate with that work are a little bit more God based or Christian based. It was a cool way for me to learn about that without like a structured, rigid religious constraint, more in its like spiritual essence.
Mm.
And through school, there's one key component I want to mention. Prior to going to school, I started listening to Joe Dispenza experience of breaking his back and healing himself. I was having, now just kind of looking back, I would say nervous system deregulation or dysregulation, emotional dysregulation, hormone dysregulation, those parts of our system that speak to each other. They were dysregulated. And Joe Dispenza's work was basically saying to me in that moment, you, you've got to become somebody different. You've got to be
Mm.
someone different, to have a different experience, to create a different outcome in the physical realm. And it kind of just blew my mind. So
Did you do any of his practices, like the meditations and manifestation practices at that time?
weird things like the biology of belief, it's really clear what the problem is. Joe Dispenza, it's really clear what the problem was. At that point, I don't know if I had access to any of his practices, but I was really unclear, the way, the solution. It was just more or less clear what was actually happening on a deeper level. Getting things tested, checking the physiology, what do the tests say, what's the diet doing? It was more this deep sense of who am I resting as? Who am I being? How do I feel? Those really basic, fundamental, primacy ways of
Mm.
being.
It seems like this opened up a trailhead for you of like, oh, there's something more to discover and find out. At that point, you'd worked with a functional medicine doctor, run lab work and all that kind of stuff. And you've done all the scientific materialist type of things with, your training in fitness and chiropractic and nutrition. Sounds like you started to understand the role of consciousness and energy in the healing kind of equation. Does that sound right? Like it kind of just opened up this curiosity of like there's something else going on, and this kind of opened up that, oh, this is a missing piece for myself and many other people.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think chiropractic school in many ways was an attempt for me to find solutions to heal myself. That was a driving factor of me going to school. The challenge itself is figuring out what's wrong with me so I can fix it. And um, that was one of the major challenges I got to work through.
And at that point, while you were in chiropractic school, what challenges were you facing? Like, what was the most pressing thing for you to fix?
Middle school, high school wrestling, I was getting these boils, these staph infections. The last two staph infections I had put me in the hospital. One was in my initially they were more on the surface, a skin infection, or an infected zit. Then I started getting them more internally. Like I got one in my elbow joint. I got one in my parotid gland. And so it was getting more serious. And the only solution I could find through the medical system was antibiotics. And I was realizing that I was kind of running that solution dry. And so that was a scary thing. And then I think the amount of distress that had on my gut started to create other challenges, depression, anxiety, skin infections. My hormones were out of whack, um, which was impacting my self-confidence. All of these things were really starting to get out of balance. And so I think those were kind of the things that were happening for me.
Thanks for sharing. I've had so many clients that have been on antibiotics way too long without really taking the appropriate measures to balance out the devastating effects to your gut. Totally hear that, man. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll
One,
say, yeah, I want to say one more thing about,
yeah, yeah, by all means.
one of the major turning points was, when I was in school, I was super driven and inspired to find something that felt purposeful to offer to the world that I felt like is impacting me on a deep level. And about a year into school, I had been invited to try a modality that's called network spinal.
Mm.
And it was described to me by a friend who had just gone through a really intense kind of healing seminar. I think he described it as he's like, it has to do with the spine, it has to do with the nervous system, and it's like spirituality and personal development. I was like, sounds dope. And in that moment, I was feeling a little bit spread thin in my approach to, um, like I felt like I was getting good at a large number of modalities, but I wasn't really mastering anything in particularly. So in that moment, I kind of made a choice point. I was like, I'm going to commit myself to this. I'm going to give this a try. And it really, really it blew my mind in powerful ways. Um,
And what is a network spinal session like? Like, what does that entail as a on the receiving end of it?
can really seem it can really look and seem pretty seamless in the beginning. Excuse me. And so it oftentimes looks like someone lying face down on a table, and a practitioner is doing a series of checks to see where someone is kind of like holding or binding energy or stress in their nervous system and their physiology. And so these are like physical checks, right? It's like a leg length. They're It's checking heel tension. So it's like this integrated system that's checking how the nervous system is holding energy and how is it impacting the fascial system and how is the body holding posture. And then it leads the practitioner to certain areas in the spine that it looks really seamless. It's like making a light touch, or we call it a contact, on certain areas of the spine that we call a gateway. And that contact brings awareness to the person's system and generates some level of a healing response. We call the healing response a sensory motor strategy. And the sensory motor strategy is basically sensory is like felt, motor is movement, and the strategy is kind of a tool for the body to move um, energy or bound stress in the system. It's like teaching the person's body how to move stress through their system at different levels of the human energy field, which are inseparable from the body. So there's kind of like an internal external inseparability that's happening. And um, yeah, within the contact, it might look like someone's just like taking a deep breath, might look like someone's like stretching and unwinding their system. Someone might be making kind of like sounds. Um, these are like natural, intuitive things that have been culturalized out of us, right? As like
Mhm.
people to be like rigid, sit in class all day, like kind of culturalized normal, I would say unhealthy ways of being. And so there's a little bit of like an invitation for someone to step into just their intuitive way to connect with themselves and to acknowledge and to move through whatever's felt under the surface that they might not even know that's there.
Wow. And did you work with this modality yourself for a while before or as you were becoming certified in it?
Yeah, I really I went all in, right? I was like, I was already seeing all of the different chiropractors. I was like really wanting to know what works for me, what doesn't work for me, what do I like, what I didn't like. And so when I was learning network spinal, I was receiving it 3 or 4 times a week. I was doing weekend seminars. It's a different thing than adjusting, like doing a structural adjustment to the spine and the nervous system, where I find that that can have, um, there's a level of um, threshold that you don't want to pass, where it's like it doesn't seem to me where that it'd be a good thing to uh, receive a physical, structural, osseous, traditional chiropractic adjustment multiple times a day or multiple times a week, unless you're in some specific container. So there's something different about network spinal where I believe this to be mostly true, depending on the practitioner, that the more you receive in some ways, the better.
Mhm.
So there was a thing where it's like the more the better. And so I'm gonna receive and get my spine checked, my nervous system checked 3 times a week. I'm gonna, go to a weekend seminar where I'm gonna receive 3 sessions in one day. So I really just kind of like went all the way in. And um obviously I imagine maybe you've had this experience as a practitioner. When you're learning the work, you're also with other learning practitioners, you're giving and receiving a lot as well. So there
Totally.
was there was like an in-depth process there of giving and receiving quite a bit.
Nice, man. And, kind of moving into your practice a little bit, I'd be curious on, well, two things. I suppose one is like, I'd love just a bit of an explanation from your perspective on how the energetic field or energetic imbalances contribute to not being able to live the life that you want. So kind of thwarting your potential, kind of how the body holds, these limiting beliefs, these self-sabotaging patterns, and how working with the physical body can actually help unlock these things.
Yeah, so great question. I feel like there's an in order to answer it, there's some level of like sharing around the human energy field of like
Sure. Yeah.
what is um so in a beautiful way, David, I think it really relates to the work that we have done together, the training that we've done together. Um w- in our IFS training, I have a different there's like a different training that I've done before that interrelates with network care and working a little bit more directly with the human energy field and the chakra system. So I think the best way to kind of share about it is to notice that we go through developmental stages as we're um, born into this world. As we're born into this world, we're learning that it's safe to be here, right? We're learning kind of the root chakra. We're learning um, the metabolic energy. We're learning grounding. We're learning um, embodied safety. Um, and so that's the first level of the energetic field is the biofield, which is metabolic energy. It's like um, safety regulation at like a biological level. And I think that when someone doesn't get that need met from the get go, this could be like pre birth to
Hmm.
birth. So, like, um, all the way through, there's a blending of all of these, I think. Um, even now, a lot of us are learning. I'm 34 years old and I'm still learning to cultivate this field more and more and more. But when it's not cultivated, and when if someone doesn't get the reflection that it's safe to be here on Earth, uh, the coping strategy that I see most often is someone basically leaving their body, right? Their spirit landing in a human body, and if the body isn't safe, the coping strategy is to leave. And so there is,
Um, yeah, I'd also be, you mentioned like leaving the body, like when people don't feel safe, they leave the body. What does that look like for some of the people that you've worked with? How do you tell that you've left your body?
is gone most of their life with a coping strategy like this, where there's actually a lack of physical embodiment. So someone might be a little bit on the thinner side, they might be a little bit frail. Um, you might describe them as a bit airy. They might describe their own experience as like disassociative. They might feel a lot of terror in their system often, right? They may notice that they avoid going into certain social settings because it's overstimulating. Um, they might like isolate. They might, because when they're around other people, they're they're if you're leaving your body, you're not really processing your experience internally. So there can be a need to isolate so that you can actually process what's happening. So you can, manage your reality in order to feel more safe. And so those are some of the things that I imagine someone would notice. Um, yeah, and it's kind of just, I think we all have, you and I are practitioners, and I think the more that we learn about these things, it's easier to notice, but we all have the sense to notice these things, right? And so if
Mm.
someone's giving a reflection of like, where are you? I don't feel you here. Um, that helps someone notice within themselves of like, oh fuck, I'm not here, right? I'm not here in my body. Um, so yeah, that's what I think someone might
Okay.
identify as.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I'd be curious, a lot of the people that uh it's two questions there, but I would just say like have you worked with anyone that was a total skeptic of any of this? Like somatic theory, that everything is energy. Like we're talking just want to ask
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
quick follow-up. I mean, first of all, that was really profound and it's almost worthy of repeating, which is like feeling like it's safe to be here. I think that really kind of so succinct and it really talks to like the core of like what you mentioned, like this root chakra imbalance. Many people don't feel like it's safe to be here. And even just saying that actually feels really healing. Being like a scientific materialist, kind of, but they, through their life path, got pulled into to working with maybe a chiropractor. And then eventually they ended up on your table. Um, and what that experience was like to reckon with this belief of like, wow, there's something much deeper going on than what I can see on a lab report.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I have worked with that type of person. Generally I would almost prefer doing um more of a one-on-one coaching with this type of person versus on the table.
Mm,
Because I think that when someone has the position of needing to know and understand prior to having an experience, right? Like we can really block ourselves from experience by uh, being in the mind. And I would rather have more in-depth conversations with this type of person versus working with them on the table because I feel like that's maybe their way of experiencing. Um, and in so I know I might not be answering your question directly.
no, it's okay. I mean, it was more of a curiosity. Like I've had clients kind of like that where, you know, there's clearly other things going on than what they present in the intake form. But,
Mhm.
they just approach me and they're like, oh, just fix my gut. Like, I don't need to do all this other stuff. Like, I don't care. And that's okay. That's a certain, worldview, right? Kind of more the scientific materialist worldview, which is fine. So in
For
light
me,
of that,
yeah.
and you mentioned the receptivity. What is like your typical client profile like? And specifically, I'm not talking about demographics. I'm more talking about what stage of their healing or personal development are they usually in when they find you, and like what are they typically looking for? Because I feel like when the sense that I get is like once you've gotten to a practitioner like yourself, you've probably gone through a labyrinth of other modalities. Um, and so yeah, I would be curious on kind of what that like the types of people that find you and where they're looking to go within their healing.
Totally. I also wanna, soon come back to the human energy field because we touched on, like, 1 of 7, um, and I think
Oh,
I think it'd be No, but I do want to answer your question because it's a follow up from
Okay, then
the
go
last
ahead and
one.
answer this, and we'll go back to the human energy field. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's cool. It's, you're totally right on the money. Where most of the clients that I work with are people who I would describe as someone. It's an interesting term, but it's having an open system. So someone
Mm,
that is kind of like in the world of the mystery. They're in direct contact with the mystery. Someone that's like has some pretty developed self-awareness, and when that's opened up, it like opens in my experience, it opens a whole terrain of work that I can do with them because we're both noticing the same subtleties. And so we're speaking a common language. And sometimes um, there's a big learning curve on that common language, but um, doom work. There's a pointing to an aspect of the experience that is subtle. And so it would be like, I'm noticing it. I ask if they're noticing it. Now we're both noticing something that's very subtle, and we get to um, develop tools and like work with that subtlety, which is in many ways a primacy of our being, our come from. Um, Back to kind of like the Joe Dispenza reference of like,
mm,
how do you feel in your body? What's that like? Is that happening all the time, or when is it happening? And when it does happen, what can we do to um, support it? Right? Because there's, uh, you know, like the example of leaving your body, there's an unmet need, and the unmet need in that example is I don't feel safe. So how do we generate safety so that I can fully land?
mm. Nice. I love this
Right.
idea of like people with a connected to the mystery and with open fields. Yeah, that's
Hmm.
that really yeah, that feels very clear to me, and I certainly know what you're talking about when you say that. Um, because I've experienced both sides, like having a closed field, not connected to the mystery, and really being in that space. And I could really imagine how when you have that open field and that connection to source or whatever you want to call it, this type of work can really allow you to take quantum leaps. Um, because you're not really working with cognition any longer. You're working with something much more profound.
Yeah, and in many spiritual texts they call it the direct experience, and
Mm,
so it's beyond concept, it's beyond thought, it's beyond idea. There is, you know, a direct experience with something that, um, in many ways can be indescribable, right? Or in many ways is, um, yeah, it's outside of the mind.
totally. Thanks for that. Let's go back to the human energy field, since you wanted to finish describing that, and I think it's very important too. So,
Yeah, so there's the bioenergetic field, and then developing to the and to kind of reference our training, there are manager protectors, and um, what I've found is that there's manager protectors and exile childs, um, in energy field, and so that what I see is kind of the coping strategy of unmet needs within specific levels of development. And so the second level of development would be in the need to feel safe within connection. And so that's in many ways the development of the emotional field, um, and um, and also kind of goes into the realm of the uh, something I would call the lower mind, uh, the the kind of bottom layer of the mental field, which is in the realm of boundaries. And so there's this like safety within connection around um, boundaries, beliefs about self, And then underneath that, the emotional fullness of enoughness, right? That's kind of getting developed when we're learning attachment and connection with mom of, can I get my needs met? Is there enough? Am I enough? And then beyond the lower mind, which is around, in some ways, identity, belief systems, structures, um, boundaries. Beyond that is the upper mind. And the upper mind is an energetic field that is based in more of like complex thoughts, multiple perspectives simultaneously. Like we're hovering the upper mind right now because we're talking about systems, we're talking about multiple perspectives coexisting simultaneously, where the lower mind is a little bit like that black or white, good or bad, right? We're in the realm of like, no, it's all good. Actually, that it's all valid. It all has its place in different ways.
Nice. Yeah,
And
that reminds me a lot of like spiral dynamics and integral theory, this idea of being construct aware and multi-perspectival, where
Mhm.
you're aware instead of shaming each level of development, which is kind of a broader conversation. We could even take it into like the geopolitical realm and culture wars and stuff, but moving into a place where you see each level of development having a role. It seems like that's kind of what you're pointing to as well. Um, nice. It
Totally.
sounded like there was
Um,
more, right? There's
it's a little bit more, um, like, so, um, yeah, it's just kind of like, it's complex and dense a bit, but like there are certain coping strategies that someone might have when they don't feel like connection is available, or they don't feel like they're enough, or like there's enough in life for them. They might energetically kind of merge with other people. They might feel empty all the time. They might have some type of addiction, like a false sense of like, I can't get enough of something. When people don't have full development, or when there's kind of like coping strategies embedded within the lower mental system or energetic field, there's generally some type of people pleasing, this like open permeability of lack of boundaries. Um, Beyond that, we're like working with this like development of power and will, and the need to, um, yeah, like trust that we have choice and will, and that we can have a desire, we can move towards that desire, and we can get a false sense of resolution in our capacity to be powerful. Um, I think that's like between the lower mind and the upper mind, and there can be coping strategies of aggression in that. There can be coping strategies of uh, the opposite of aggression, which would be more of like a masochistic enduring pattern,
Mhm.
um, or like parts, you know.
Yeah, the part. So I wanted to bring in kind of the IFS component here,
Yeah.
which is, many people that I work with are maybe people I know that are still doing healing work. They cognitively know something. So they intellectually know that maybe they went to therapy, they understand where their patterns may come from. They are
Mm.
many times not blended with those patterns, they're able to see them, but they're still stuck in a cycle of addiction, mediocrity, self-sabotaging, etc. How does your work contend with like the polarization that exists in many people's systems, especially people that are at times very open, very connected with mystery, and generally, have an intention to do powerful, amazing things. So they have like their life purpose, they have a clear sense of what they need to do, where they want to go, but they keep getting in their own way. Like, how does that dynamic sort of fit in with, your experience in doing this work with your clients?
It's a great question. One of the principles that I really love to use, uh, especially its relationship to polarity with someone's kind of patterns, is something that I call the wisdom process. And the acronym of the wisdom
Mm,
process is A, which is awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance. And so it's like if they're in a pattern of doing something that's in some ways self sabotaging, if they can start to use this process of being aware that they're in the pattern, acknowledge the feeling that maybe they are trying to avoid through the pattern, right? And just like allow themselves to be in the pattern, right? There's kind of like this like awareness of it, acknowledging of it, accepting of it, and this kind of like just moving into like consciously doing it can start to depolarize the shame cycle that they might experience with it. And
yeah,
once they move into like a little bit more of an acceptance phase with it, they might start to realize that they don't need to do the thing to feel safe, right? They can actually like face and meet life as it is without having to use some level of um, coping strategy that's self-sabotaging.
totally. No, that's it's really helpful. And I brought that up because, in in our conversations and in your work, you've talked a little bit about attachment theory, IFS, and a couple other modalities. So I'm gonna take a sip of water.
Yeah,
I love I love how you have the Mountain Valley bottles. I love those.
I know.
They're the best. Cool, man. So coming off of that, wanted just to check in to see if there was anything else around the energy systems that we wanted to share. And then after that, I have a couple more questions.
Yeah, cool. I'll say one more thing about the last question you asked. I think something also powerful is like
Mm,
someone holding structure with that type of person, right? So a level of like accountability, structure, and um and self-management, right? Because we can um there's you know, developmentally we may have not been reflected the importance of structures and self-management and discipline. And in other ways, we may have like me in the past said in some ways over cultivated some of that to the point where it got rigid and it became more about the doing versus like how I actually felt as I was doing something, right? There was like an override. And so I think the discomfort of overcoming our fears and creating something in the world that we want to create, I think Um, things like businesses, things like relationship can be a very um, amplifying, healing pointer, of like where where my things are working well and maybe where I need quite a bit of support. And if we can continue to move forward while meeting ourselves and acknowledging the way that we feel and getting resolution and whatever's coming up, I think that can generate massive healing in our lives and in the world.
yeah, I'll hold to that. I mean, that's yeah. I think the shame aspect in particular feels really resonant
Yeah.
because the one issue that I take with the whole subconscious reprogramming, hypnotherapy, Joe Dispenza type of work, and I've done this work. I really enjoy it actually. Is this idea of like negative and positive emotions and like, oh, if you're a high performer, if you're a spiritual person, if you're someone on the path, then you can't feel a certain way. There's just, I think it's in myself and in others. It creates a bit of shadow, um, and unnecessary shame instead of just acknowledging like the messiness of being enthralled in a society that is by default at a pretty low level of development and we're trying to
Mm.
live beyond the cultural center of gravity and do things that are not at all normal. Um, and it's a little icky, and I'm sure no matter how intentional of a community you're in, or how, like, if you're in Nosara, it feels like everyone is like, really ultra spiritual surfer doing yoga. But they had an upbringing and they still deal with social media and with email and bureaucracy and all sorts of stuff. So I think that's such an important point, especially for someone who's doing a lot of inner work, identifies as someone who is quote unquote kind of spiritual. There can be a lot of residual shame, I think, especially if you're feeling anxious or self-conscious, or you're vain in some ways. So that's really cool that accounts for that, because I think a lot of modalities deepen that shame actually.
Totally. I agree. Yeah, I think some of what I heard you say too is that it all has its place, right? And um,
Totally.
there's totally gifts in there is absolutely gifts that I see in creating a future memory that's loaded with lots of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins that support our emotional experience and attracting the reality that we're creating. And it's not full, complete, and whole unless we're also in some way acknowledging what really feels real on deep levels, which I think if we don't do that, we're going to continue to get pulled down into it, right? Because
Mm,
our systems are intelligent to the point where things want to resolve. And I think oftentimes that's what life is kind of mirroring back to us, is where there's area to resolve parts of our wounding and our trauma, areas that we are learning to love fully.
that's, yeah, I definitely hear all that. And what's really coming through the conversation so far, is like this attention to our soma, to our body and how we feel. I really enjoy what you said around being performance oriented, like doing something, but not being concerned about how you feel doing it. And for many of us, we just run around in our lives doing things because we should be doing them, um, or they're good for us, or our culture told us to do that, but really ignoring and exiting the body. And I find that that's such a helpful North Star in your life, is to notice that lack of safety, to notice just kind of what your moment to moment experience is like. Um, as probably the most important data point you could possibly have, as a person.
Mm.
So that's yeah, it's really helpful. I personally find that as well. Working in the functional medicine space, many people give away their power in terms of
Mhm.
asking you as a practitioner or as the coach, to tell them how what's going on in their body based off of a piece of paper and a urine sample. And, there's
Mhm.
a lot of things you can certainly tell, and there's a time and place for, clinical interpretations. But I feel that, what we've been discussing today, this whole energy body, is really empowering, actually, because it's very
Mhm.
interoceptive, and it's not something that I just run a machine on you and tell you what's going on. It's really very much an inside job, and a way of being. So yeah, that's I can see that being extraordinarily powerful for when you're in the right place. Um,
Mhm. Definitely a powerful combination of what I see you doing right now.
for
Empowering
sure.
people to reference their direct experience as well.
Absolutely. Was there anything else you wanted to say on the energy body before we kind of move into kind of the application and kind of starting to understand, like, what it's like to build an energy practice for most of us?
Yeah. Something that I think I'll mention because it seems to be one of the most pervasive in the culture, um, especially in our communities of personal personal development is, I think, more of the last and most um, complex um, coping strategies that I find and that I track is something that I would call the rigid pattern. And, it's something that we're kind of speaking to in terms of performance and like doing it right. So it's like parts of us that have learned to receive love from within our families and within the culture by like really doing a good job, doing it right, um, and following the rules. And um, yeah, and it can really generate this level of like energetically. I want to point to this because I think it's something that most people would relate with. It's something that I definitely related with, and it was like powerful within my healing journey. Which the felt sense is generally some level of um, constriction in the body, and um, and like a level of constriction, and it could be it is very subtle unless someone's aware of it, or unless someone's having like a really intense I think experience of this pattern where um, the body's constricting its energy and actually moving it up to the mind and generating a lot of mental figuring it outness. Um, and I think our culture really reflects this back to us of like, you got to look a certain way, you've got to act a certain way, you've got to um, do things a certain way in order to be valued in our society. And it creates an experience of kind of constricting the body and being up in the mind and like talking to people at their mind where there isn't a level of like dropped in um, beingness and softness and um, validating the direct experience of the body, validating the direct experience of connection. And it's something that I think is I feel almost bad saying it, but like pervasive in um what culture is reflected back to women, right? That takes them out of their feminine essence of a radiating heart and a radiating body, an emotional body where there's where it's like, culture is reflected back to women. I think that they've got to like work and perform and all these things. And I think it's had a lot of us kind of living life from a mental construct versus a a rested, resourced, embodied way of being.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. Would be curious then, we talked about this disconnection of the body, being in the mind, constriction there. What are some things we can do to take people out of that or to normalize coming back into the body? So like if you're speaking with someone, or even if let's start with ourselves actually. So if you notice, let's say constriction in your body as you're you mentioned being in a social environment. I've certainly experienced that. I've certainly experienced the lack of belonging, for many, many years. And like, what can we do to start to break that pattern? To just kind of normalize, kind of, oh, like I'm voicing how I feel, or taking a moment to come back in. Like, what is something that you recommend, let's say, a client to do when they notice that they're in that pattern?
Something that's extremely simple but also profound that I've found working with clients is simply like being and offering a regulated nervous system that is rested in connection. So there's like availability for connection, and there is one moment, there's siren going by. Yeah. So something that I've found that works really well with clients is something that's very simple and also profound, which is simply resting into a regulated nervous system, like resting into the body. And we have a technology within our bodies, within our nervous systems of entrainment, or in science, they call it mirror neurons, where we just kind of magically attune to each other. So you might notice that when you're with somebody, there is some level of reflection, or, you know, the way that they are creates something in your experience, right? Maybe you're with somebody and you get more in the mind, or you're with somebody, you get more in the body. So simply offering a container of resting into the body and offering that within my own being and reflecting it back to them, and just subtly kind of pointing them into the breath, into the body, into slowing it down, into feeling subtle aliveness, into feeling rested and resourced. So there's kind of just like within a healing container, or within being with somebody else, there is offering safety in just these ways of being. And I say this often, where it's like we we oftentimes, I I can't really think of any time where a lot of the I'll say it again. Um, these distortion patterns or these coping mechanisms that we've been talking about, I don't think generally ever are created in isolation, right? They're created within relationship. So I think although many of us want to like take on a practice to help ourselves in certain ways, uh, I think that it's very essential and important to do these types of healings in session with other people, because we're working on something that wasn't created in isolation. We're working on something that was created with other. And so we're learning how to be with other people, and also being in a place of like rested, resourced, empowered, embodied.
Nice. That's a really amazing. I find that most personal development takes or the story around most personal growth is that you need to do it on your own. You need to go into a therapy room, figure yourself out, go work with a coach, do some meditation, do your ice baths, do your Wim Hof. Even even many psychedelic journeys involve like an eye cover, so you don't even see other people. That's a really really important point. S- on the conversely though, like I feel that as you're saying this, like practicing being in that rested, embodied state on your own is probably going to be a helpful starting point for many people.
Oh,
Um, and noticing that, and I notice like just myself, like when I leave my body or feeling, or the times that I feel disconnected, tends to be around other people, and I'm around. You inherit the energetic field of the people around you. Living in New York City, there tends to be a lot of very type A anxious people, very much like above the shoulders type of folks. I
hmm
definitely notice when I'm around them that I start to mirror their frequency a little bit, like the way they talk, their speed, um, just even like the breathing pattern of mostly like breathing out, just a lot of little things like that. So I think that's it's really a great point of this like community aspect of using socializing or being in a relationship as kind of the playground or the kind of practice ground for embodiment and safety. So that's really hard for someone for like as an introvert. I was like, oh no, like I just want to go regulate in my room, be alone for a little bit. But like the way you just framed it actually really helped me understand that importance of the communal element.
Yeah, David, I'm also oriented very similarly. Like, um, I'm like can sometimes have a hidden belief that I'm going to do the best at self-resourcing,
Mm.
um, and it can be extremely uncomfortable for me to reach out for support when I'm needing support. And um, I think that can some ways be like very masculine, uh, help, like hyper reliant pattern. And, um, and I personally think that I do pretty well at it. And I'm also in the working the edge of, reaching out and getting support from others when I need it. And I've got a really powerful, great community for that. Um, and I'm also, I'll just mention, I'm happy to offer some tools and resources for people in the self-resource category, because I do believe that it's a powerful practice. It's an essential practice for people to take on.
Yeah, and I'd love to kind of transition into that actually. So, if let's say, I'm someone who, is can feel that constriction, like you said, has that open field, you know, which I personally feel the open field is a double-edged sword because it means that you're more empathic, right? You're taking in energies from other people, but you're also more sensitive. And I think um, discovering that your sensitivity is a gift, I think, is kind of an epiphany that many people end up having because it doesn't feel like a gift many times. And so, yeah, what would be a helpful starting point for people to start to work with their energetic body, work with those blockages, and kind of cultivate a practice of just that awareness piece? Kind of, we talked about awareness, acceptance, acknowledgement. Um, yeah, like what would that look like for someone starting out?
Yeah. I'm going to offer a little map. I think it's supportive to offer a map so that we know, so we can
Yeah, for
explore the
sure.
spectral work a bit. But um, you mentioned spiral dynamics, integral theory. I think this is um, very agreed upon developmental map of um, levels of mind or levels of awareness where someone throughout time is developing their capacity to experience life, and they can move through the first stage, which is, and I don't know if stage is the right word, level, of um, ordinary mind, ordinary consciousness, or I think Ken Wilber describes it as uh, gross mind, which is essentially awareness is tied up and identified with thought and with the mind. And the second stage would be moving into subtle energy. And subtle energy is the direct experience of aliveness and sensation in the body. And then the third stage would be spacious awareness, um, kind of acknowledging where do we start, where do we end, right? Do I exist beyond my body, or can I expand my awareness and my direct experience, can experience myself outside of my body in the space? Can I experience the quality of the space? And then there's witness awareness, right? Like witnessing ourselves from outside of our body from a different perspective. And then there are um, kind of different variations of non-dual, um, but we'll just leave it simple as non-dual, right? Experiencing energy and awareness inside the body, outside the body, uh, potentially, you know, very expansive, like experiencing life from life itself. And so there's kind of a map to track where you are uh, within awareness. And so if we're moving from ordinary mind to subtle energy, um, some practice that we can work on is simply slowing it down, the mental field and and operating from the mental construct is generally happening at a quicker pace than the emotional system and the physical system. So step one, I would say, is slowing it down. Step two would be tracking the sensation of the breath. And then step three for me is um, being still. And then beyond stillness, there is um, I would describe it as deep listening. And that would be like listening or feeling deeply for stillness inside the body and or outside the body. And another way of deep listening I would describe as open receptivity, being in a state of open feeling and sensing.
Is there a way the first steps felt really clear to me as far as slowing down?
And yeah.
Um, no, the for real. So, like, kind of, slowing down. You mentioned one thing that I think is really important to highlight is that the thinking mind or kind of dense consciousness, as we've been talking about it, operates at a rate that is significantly faster than the emotional and the physical body, which I feel is part of the reason that it's so easy to ignore or not hear the whispers of the body and how you really feel because it's being overridden by the thinking mind, which is on basically from when you wake up to when you go to sleep for most people. So that feels really clear around tracking the breath, slowing down, paying attention, being more interoceptive. That's great. When we talk about these other levels, deep listening, attunement, etc., what are some tools or modalities that you use in order to? Because I feel like most people aren't going to be living their day to day life in open awareness. I think for most people, the shift from the thinking mind into subtle energy, correct me if I'm wrong, feels like a
Mhm.
very like a healthy ambition to have. So, like, if you're doing your work, if you're talking to your partner or with a friend, being in connection with that subtle energy field, that subtle aliveness, where you look at a tree and it kind of sparkles almost, like kind of like that, is what comes to mind for me.
Mhm.
Um, but then, how do we take things a bit further? When necessary. Like, what would that look? What does that look like for you? I guess.
Um, for me, more recently, it's been more of a meditation process. But I would say in the beginning, it was a lot more somatic. And I think that um, many people are uncomfortable resting into their bodies and uncomfortable resting into um, subtle energy is because there's a lot of unprocessed aspects of their experience that live there. And so I think that somatic experiencing or some type of healing practice is really essential to cultivating love and compassion and processing um, that area of the body or those areas of the body into more of like a loving, regulated, cultivated resource place of power. And so the one of the modalities that I use that is a self practice also works really powerfully with a practitioner
Mm.
is kind of a sibling modality to network spinal, and it's called somatorespiratory integration. And essentially, the overarching principle is meeting what is, right? And matching and meeting what is And when we meet what is with love, we use that AAA, awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance, it essentially allows it to transform and evolve into its next stage. Um, which sometimes is just presence and love. Other times there's other stages of healing that it might need to go through. And so the um the process might look like, and I do this often, and it's more or less like at this point, I've been practicing it for almost 10 years now. So it's kind of embedded into my nervous system to be aware of a state that might feel uncomfortable, acknowledge it and feel it, maybe even speak into it. Uh, Different than like, I feel safe, I feel safe. It's more like, sometimes I don't feel safe right here. Right. So it's like, just like IFS parts work, it's like giving it a voice to be heard and acknowledged and seen and
Mm.
felt, experienced. And so we can use our hands as kind of like microphones, magnifying glass, stethoscopes, right? We're just kind of like amplifying awareness by checking in with our hands, and we can kind of just check in along the anterior portion of the body. We can use specific centers like the high heart, the solar plexus just below the rib cage, the lower dantian right below the belly button. And we can just simply breathe into those areas, and we can simply feel what feels connected, what feels resourced. And then we can get curious around the places that might feel numb, might feel pressure, might feel heaviness, might feel sadness, might feel stuck. And as we feel what we feel, we can simply use a language pattern of, sometimes it seems like I'm disconnected right here. And then leave space after the acknowledgement phrase to let that be experienced and processed. Someone might want to make a sound. Someone might want to like just feel something deeply. Someone might feel like they want to cry, or they might cry. And then um, going back and forth between the areas of resource in the body and the areas of under resource or disconnection in the body. Or it could be disconnection, could be feeling stuck, could feel sad, could feel heavy. And, I believe suffering is um, a symptom of disconnection, right? Lack of wholeness. And, um, in IFS words, it might even be like identification with that part, which merging with that part can be extremely painful. So when we are able to identify that it's there and acknowledge it, and then go back and forth between that space within our being and a space of resource and connection within ourselves, it can start to break through the illusion that we're that, which is massively empowering. And so I believe that practice is super powerful and important for people to like safely connect with their bodies in areas that they might feel widely discomfortable with.
Yeah, thanks for
Practicing.
explaining all that. I mean,
Mm.
that does sound very powerful, and I think it's beautiful, the integration of, you have, like, a bit of parts work, kind of self-acceptance, and really just being with what is. I think that's really powerful, and there's a couple threads I wanna go on from here, but, I kinda wanna talk a little bit about your vision actually for your community and, on your website, but also just the way that you speak about your work. You're talking about serving healers, seekers, and practitioners to basically unlock their life purpose and assist in the awakening of humanity or collective awakening. First of all, I just want to confirm: is that an accurate summary, or am I just pulling something out of my ass there? Does that sound right?
That's pretty close, man. And I would
Okay.
say there's There's probably a couple vision statements that I have, but that's
Okay.
definitely one of
All right. All
them.
right. Cool. Cool. So, and feel free to correct me, but I kind of want to get a sense. The reason I'm asking this question is because most practitioners, especially those that are body workers, craniosacral therapists, etc., Reiki healers, are really focused on the results they're delivering to an individual. A lot of the ways that you speak about your work and community, you're talking about making an impact at a much larger level, that your healing is serving kind of this broader healing. And I just want to have you expand upon that and learn a little bit about, like, why you approach your work in that way. Um, what is the biggest, highest vision for bringing this into the world for you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Um, I think part of it is in some ways an acknowledgement of my own way, right? And like I had a practice in San Diego for 4 years where I was seeing um in some ways like as many clients as possible, right? Which was around 40 clients a week. And in comparison to other practitioners in my field, that's very little, right? Some people will see 100 clients a day. And so it's like part of my vision for myself and the collective, and my purpose, my way, is an acknowledgement and serving my personal gifts and how I best work, which I believe is going really deep with certain individuals. And so I love serving and supporting therapists, practitioners, coaches, and healers because I feel like I work at a level of depth where I can support someone from going to like a level 8 to a level 10. And, um, and I feel like that's the best use of my time because, um, yeah, and that's what's most exciting for me. And so if I can help someone do that, especially if they're a coach, therapist, healer, practitioner, then I feel like the work that I'm doing is having a large impact, right? Because it really ripples out and I can be connected to what those individuals are creating for their clients or supporting their clients with or with with their mission. I feel like we have a connected vision. And then really beyond that, I think that David, I imagine we're similar in age, and
I'm
I
36.
think,
Yep.
uh, yeah, I'm 34. So
Yeah.
I think people of our generation, whether they really identify with it or not, um, really do deeply care about the world, the state of the world, and what's happening, and how can we be in more harmony with the earth, and how can we like honor humanity at a deep level, and how can we live in integrity with our spirits. I think that that's like a, a vision or a need or like a desire for people within our generation. So I see all of us in some ways as visionaries and healers, right? We're like I'm a North Node Aquarius, so um, I don't know what that means to who, but for me, it means that like we're wanting to see uh, a larger awakening within the world that we live in so that we can honor ourselves and each other in the world and earth. Yeah, I feel really inspired to support those who are creating a large impact in the world and who know that the limitation of their impact is themselves, right? And the ways that they get in their own way. And if I can help someone create a large impact by helping them love themselves and get out of their own way, um, that's extremely exciting to me.
Amazing. I mean, especially that last part just really resonated. learning to love themselves and get out of their own way. So, I mean, I think a lot of people listening can resonate with that and that sort of predicament. Dude, this has been a really powerful conversation, and would love to open it up for you to just share a little bit about where listeners can find you. If there's any offerings that you have on the horizon, whether they be in person or virtual, and if there's a way for those listening to experience energetic repatterning themselves. So go ahead and leave it off to you, and we'll go ahead and conclude from there.
Thanks, David. Yeah, the easiest way to get into contact with me, I would say, is through Instagram. So, following my work on Instagram, reaching out, generally available to have a conversation on Instagram. And I'm actually moving back to Costa Rica in about a week, and we'll probably be opening up a small practice for in-person sessions in Costa Rica. And um, I believe for most people, the best way to work with me would be in a one-on-one container through Zoom, and kind of learn and go through the energetic repatterning process. Um, that is kind of my main offer right now, and I'm currently pretty full with my client load. Um, I would say I have space for one or two more clients at this point. And if at whatever point, this might happen soon, I've actually been feeling a little bit inspired. At whatever point, if there's enough need or external desire that I feel from people, I'd love to open up some type of group container. I've done a large number of group containers, healing containers, that I love to do. It's been about a year since I've done one of those, so I've been in the consideration of doing one of those. That'd be really exciting for me. But right now, it's mostly one-on-one coaching, uh, taking people through the energetic repatterning process. Best place for people to reach out to me is on Instagram and learn about my work through Instagram. Um, yeah, that's what's most alive for me.
Cool. Thanks for sharing
Hmm.
that. And all of that will be included in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the description. We'll be linking to all of Alan's socials and his website, so you can get in touch. And where in Costa Rica are you located? Because you never know, someone might be over there
Yeah, Nosara.
in Nosara.
Excuse
Okay,
me.
so in case you're in Nosara, you could also check out his in-person practice. So,
Yeah,
all right.
same if
Well,
that's of interest.
dude, thanks once again for the conversation. I feel like there's tidbits and there's a lot of additional trailheads for future conversations, but I really hope that today kind of laid a great foundation for energy healing, coming back into your body, and how this type of energetic repatterning work could really help you live the life that's buried within inside of you, that unrealized potential that's waiting to be awakened, and that a lot of your other type of inner work is really kind of pointing you towards. So once again, thanks for Alan for coming on, and may each of you be happy, healthy, and move through this life with ease. Much love to you all, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.